kind of a disrupting Wednesday going on.
Yeah, yes. Now, why are you saying that?
Well, with all of the bombs showing up in mailboxes, CNN's newsroom was evacuated this morning as well there in terms of...
That would be disruptive for a lot of people.
For a lot of things going on. And we're going to be talking about more disruptive behaviors here as we follow up last week's show. This is Talking Point Live. My name is Eric Young.
I'm Jennifer Kohler.
And we're here to talk about a few things having to do with the election process that's going to happen here within the next 2 or 3 weeks. We've been talking about an article that was published by Jane Mayer in the New Yorker here. We started that last week and then got into a bit of her analysis of Dr. Jamison
And we just kind of barely introduced that at the end of the show, right?
Kind of touched the surface on it. And really what I wanted to get into was how the concepts that are introduced by Russian meddling actually kind of float to the top of the conversations that we're having, not just in terms of how we're going to vote or how that influences us to vote, but how it actually enters the vernacular of debate in the United States.
Okay.
But
But
I'm not going to do that today because there's something else that has been brought to my attention.
okay. So just know that I spent a lot of time going through that article and highlighting talking points in it.
Good, I'm glad you have.
So if I just kind of out of nowhere pipe up with something
you can interject at any time.
Okay, great.
And I'm sure with what I have to cover, that you can go through and make some relationships with what's going on in the article.
But, however, if I interrupt you and you don't want to like be interrupted, just keep going and you could give me the hand. You couldn't do that.
No, that would be rude.
I'll just try hard not to
You know, I've noticed not
off.
only are we kind of leaving our pole positions and coming toward the middle, but you're interrupting more than I am now.
Wowzers. That's all I have to say. Well, I come from a family of chronic interrupters, so it's probably my habitual behavior, actually.
The reason why we bring that up is because I just interrupted you. I'm sorry, what?
Sorry.
In the course of civil discourse, one of the things not to do is maybe to interrupt the person that you're having some kind of interaction or engagement with. But here, we like to step on each other a little bit just to kind of maybe clash, get a point.
Well, and there's a lot to cover.
There's a lot to go on.
So we have to throw
we've already used
etiquette aside and just go for it.
As it goes along. We had 2 viewers chime in on last week's show, though, that I wanted to address. One was Connor Fankhauser, and I want to let you know that
the mugs.
Here we are. We're no longer using throwaway bottles. We're using our mugs. Got some nice KUER swag here.
Or Zion National Park, if you prefer.
The good folks at KUER Radio. The second one is one that I want to read because he kind of addresses what you said in last week's show in regards to I think to give some context to this, the idea that there were African American voters who were told that they didn't need to go out and vote, that they could vote via Twitter or via Facebook or social media, and your response was, well, who's gonna, who can fall for something like that, or we're responsible for what we think, and this is from Taylor Michael Grin, and I'll admit right now he's somewhat of an associate an associate producer here for me for what I've been receiving and how I've been studying things.
So he's on your side.
Well, he's
one of your minions.
Well, he's a former student of the program, and he's gone on to a few things. He says, "I would slightly disagree with we are responsible for our minds." He quotes you directly. Quick, don't think about a pink elephant. You did, didn't you? Did you think about a pink elephant?
Okay, yes.
Right. The Rand Corporation fire hose of falsehood model makes a compelling argument that a mass disinformation campaign is critically effective in warping people's perception of reality. In the same way as the pink elephant, we're talking about weaponized deception used to create a political outcome. Pragmatically, consequentially, there's not much difference between that and manipulating the physical ballots.
Well, okay, so when I was thinking of the pink elephant just now, I wasn't thinking of it in terms of, I can't wait till I actually see one. So I would just say...
Oh, but you visualized one.
I visualized one, but I did not act on it as if it were a fact of reality, and I certainly didn't vote for a pink elephant.
Well, but your mind was still influenced at the very least
it was.
to visualize
it. Was, but then I had to exercise my critical thinking.
Well, then
ask
you started
myself,
thinking.
Is there really such a thing as a pink elephant? Maybe I should check it out before I act on it, as if it were reality.
Well,
right?
we could. I don't want to take the time to get into pink
Right.
elephant gifts and that kind of thing. But his point, which is one that I agree with,
Okay.
at the very least, at the suggestion of the concepts that are being put out there. I'm going to
Yes.
cover a lot of those concepts today. In fact, in our show.
Can I chime in on
3 or 4
that
of them.
suggestion?
Yeah.
Well, in a sense, I agree
Okay.
with this point. Is that Noam Chomsky, who my students get a big dose of in my classes, makes the point that in totalitarian governments, they don't have to manipulate their populations so much by propaganda because they have the threat of force. But in a democracy like ours, where they don't have the strong threat of force, they have to keep us in line and manipulate us by way of propaganda, by way of what we think.
Right.
So I wholeheartedly agree with the concept that we are flooded with propaganda constantly, and as citizens, the only way to fight back about that is to be aware of its presence and then exercise our critical thinking.
And that's what we're trying to do here with
Right.
this show. That's the whole
Right.
point in terms of media analysis, is to go back and say, this isn't what it seems to be. And not just based on our opinion, but based on our research, based on how we've looked at the sources and what they mean, how credible those sources are, and so on. We seem to get into this disclaimer on every show, and maybe we need to do it on every show so you're aware of our agenda and what it is that we're trying to do. That being said, please understand that the views and opinions expressed on today's show are only representative of what Jen and I feel, not necessarily of Dixie State University or the community education.
And for me, they're subject to change with
channel.
more information.
Right.
Right.
We're on the flexible side, at the risk of being accused of flip-flopping, perhaps. The more information we get, the more data we get, the more validation we get with that.
Or contradiction.
Or contradiction. We might go through and actually change our minds, which is entirely possible. So there's something that's come to my attention here. Do you remember last July when a certain Russian national was kind of brought to the forefront in terms of maybe her relationships with certain individuals, with certain members of Congress, certain PACs like the National Rifle Association and things of that nature?
Yes, a fairly young woman, maybe with red hair and
right.
quite attractive.
It was Maria Butina.
Okay.
Was her name. I think we have a shot of her.
Well, there she is.
This is
And she's
one
got
of
the
her
red
more infamous or famous shots. And this was fascinating because she was an undeclared, not undocumented, she hadn't registered as a Russian national, and yet had all kinds of influence. As a Russian, not national, I'm trying to think of the word to it, but she was not registered as such, as
okay.
like a lobbyist in that respect,
okay.
and yet still had plenty of influence, as you can tell, not only by her political ideals, her ideology and that with guns, and she's a huge gun advocate in Russia as well. If you look at her Facebook page, and you can look her up by her name and you'll come right to her Facebook page. And as such, she came under scrutiny. She was arrested there, and as far as I know, from what I was able to determine, was still being detained while the federal government tries to come up with something to charge her with.
Oh.
There. The initial detainment or the initial accusations were enough to keep her detained, but they're trying to come up with something more. Well, we've forgotten about that really since last July, because so much has happened within that interim that, how do you keep up? We have this whole fire hose news cycle now that's going on, thanks to all kinds of stuff that's happening around us. Not the least of which are those bombs that have been delivered here within the last 24 hours.
Here meaning?
Here in the United States. Here
okay.
with
CNN,
influential
right.
Democrats and a news service that way. So there's something that's been brought to my attention as well, and this is an affidavit of that's been filed with the Department of Justice by a member of the FBI. You can go ahead and put that up there if you would. This is an affidavit in support of a criminal complaint, and it's against a woman, another Russian woman, by the name of Elena Kushyanova. and the charge is with a conspiracy to defraud the United States. It's in violation of Title 18 in the United States Code section of 371. There.
Oh, 371.
Oh, that one.
Yeah.
Right, as it goes.
Of course.
She's 44 years old. She's of St. Petersburg, and she's the chief accountant of Project Latka. And this is that conspiratorial backbone behind a great deal of the Russian meddling that's been going on. Now, you might remember President Trump kind of saying, well, it could have been the Russians, it could have been the Chinese, it could be some 400-pound guy sitting on his bed.
In his mom's basement.
In his mom's basement. I don't know that he went that far, but you know, we can all go through and fill in the blanks along that line. So I've read this affidavit, and I've gone through, and I'm not surprised by it, but I think a lot of our viewers will be when you understand the sophistication of what this meddling actually consists of. What does this take?
Are you going to read some of it?
How much money is put behind it?
Are you going to share some of it?
You know, I'm going to break our cardinal rule, and I'm going to read on the air.
Because really, that does not make good television, which is an important thing to just highlight, is that we're violating several conventions of good television by thinking on air and now by reading on air. And so we realize that television is not the ideal medium for that you should actually look it up yourself.
Absolutely, and I'll put a link to this up on our Facebook page. I was going to do that this morning before the show.
But I'm glad you're going to read it.
Well, so this is in hopes of good journalism at the very least, that instead of taking a news report, and I've only found 2 on this, and when I first started searching this, late last night I couldn't find any, and then CBS News popped up, and then the Telegraph out of London popped up with a little tiny story on this, which is, again, is fascinating to me because, man, there's a lot more to this than what we're realizing. Mainly because, you know, when we talk about Russian meddling, we kind of go back to the 2016 elections. She is charged with her conspiracy with this upcoming election in November, in the first week of November.
This
her name is Kushanova.
Kushanova, okay.
Is who she is. So the complaint was filed by, we have a shot of Kushanova as well, of Elena. Let's go ahead and put that up there as well so you have a little bit of context of who it is that we're talking about. Or there she is, it already went up. And this looks like, because she might have an orange jumpsuit on, like a booking photograph, but it's not. I think this was a headshot from the professional organizations, and there are a number of them that she is associated with that way. So the FBI agent who filed this affidavit with the Department of Justice is a man by the name of David Holt. He says, being duly sworn under oath, I do hereby depose and state that he's a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and he's been employed since August of 2008. And he's assigned to the Washington field office, where he's responsible for the investigation of foreign influence of operations and other national security matters that deal with cyber nexus. So this is a specialty. What's interesting in my research about Elena is that I haven't been able to find out, first off, how was she detained? Where was she at that point? This comes after the indictment of 12 Russian individuals in the Mueller probe. What's interesting is this has nothing to do with the Mueller probe. This didn't come from the Mueller investigation. This came directly from the Department of Justice through the auspices of the FBI.
Okay.
All right. So, while people would like to lump all this together, it's not. It's not part of that campaign
of the witch hunt.
Or the witch hunt, as the case might be. So, in probable cause, this is what the affidavit goes through and lists, and forgive me for reading. This is probable cause to believe that from at least 2014 to the present, Kushanova conspired with persons known and unknown to defraud the United States by impairing, obstructing, and defeating the lawful functions of the United States Department of Justice and Federal Election Commission in administering federal requirements for the disclosure of foreign involvement in certain domestic activities in violation of Title 18 U.S. Code, Section 371. Among the persons with whom Kushanova conspired are known and unknown employees and associates of Concord and Project Latka entities. And this conspiracy had its objects in impairing, obstructing, and defeating the lawful governmental functions of the United States by dishonest means in order to enable Project Latka actors to interfere with U.S. political and electoral processes, including the 2018 U.S. elections. So no 400-pound guy sitting in his grandmother's basement on his bed here. And this gets a lot more sophisticated as well. Let me get into the definition of the conspiracy. The conspiracy has a strategic goal, which continues to this day, to sow division and discord in the U.S. political system, including by creating social and political polarization, undermining faith in democratic institutions, and influencing U.S. elections, including the upcoming 2018 midterm election. The conspiracy has sought to conduct what it called internally, quote, information warfare against the United States of America, close quote. And that quotation comes from their material.
Mm-hmm. Okay? In-house, okay.
Right? Information warfare against the United States of America. Through fictitious U.S. personas on a social media platforms and other internet-based media. So they are taking two different approaches here. One is through what's called organic content, and the other one is through commercial content. So the ads that are running on Facebook and Twitter or any other social media platform that might be out there. Or do you understand what organic content is?
Yes. So it arises naturally from the effort or the object. But
it comes from an original poster. It doesn't come from a news source. It comes from a Facebook user there. So there's a very sophisticated network of Facebook users involved in this project, in this conspiracy, as well as organizing a number of ad campaigns to put that out there. Let me get into how sophisticated this is. So members, this is again from the affidavit that I'm reading, all right? So this isn't a news story, it's a legal document from the Department of Justice. Members of the conspiracy, posing as U.S. persons, operated fictitious social media personas, pages, and groups designed to attract U.S. audiences and to address divisive U.S. political and social issues or advocate for the election or electoral defeat of particular candidates. These personas, groups, and pages falsely claimed to be controlled by U.S. activists when, in fact, they were controlled by members of the conspiracy. Over time, these accounts have become the conspiracy's primary means to reach significant numbers of Americans for purposes of interfering with the U.S. political system. So there you have that grassroots kind of campaign going on with a number of different Facebook users who are organizing. They have Facebook pages that are organizing political rallies, protests, that kind of thing as well. We talked about that in last week's show as well. This is evidence that this is still ongoing. And then it gets into their advertising approach. Members of the conspiracy made various expenditures to carry out those activities, including buying social media analytics, products, and services, as well as advertisements on social media, in some instances through third-party intermediaries. Members of the conspiracy also staged and promoted political rallies inside the United States, and while posing as U.S. grassroots entities and U.S. persons, and without revealing their Russian identities, Project Latka affiliation promoted or disparaged candidates and campaigns, and organized rallies and counter-protests, particularly socially divisive issues. So this is burbling up on all levels, and not just concentrated within certain voting districts. I mean, it's nationwide, and it gets into more detail that way. But first, let me get into their operations. How do they function? What's going on? Okay. This is amazing.
And this is laid out in the affidavit as well.
I'm quoting verbatim out of the affidavit. To effectively manage such large-scale operation, the conspiracy was headed by a management group and organized into departments, including a design and graphics department, an analysis department, an analysts department, a search engine optimization or SEO department, an information technology department, and a finance department. Now, Cambridge Analytica took that one step further, and they actually had a production department as well, where they were producing video that looked like it was high-value media content, and I have to wonder if that's not included under this umbrella that way. Between in or around December 2016 and May 2018, as part of the conspiracy's effort to sow discord in the U.S. political system, members of the conspiracy used social media and other media platforms to inflame passions on a wide variety of topics, including immigration, gun control, the Second Amendment, the Confederate flag, race relations, LGBT issues, the Women's March, and the NFL national anthem debate. Members of the conspiracy took advantage of specific events in the United States to anchor their themes, including the shootings of church members in Charleston, Concert attendees in Las Vegas, Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, and associated violence, police shootings of African-American men, as well as the personnel and policy decisions of the current U.S. administration.
So if I understand correctly, they've taken a lot of real events that happen by real Americans in the country, and then they've taken the issues around those failings, if you will, or those incidents, and then amplified and projected them in a way to be more disruptive.
They've created rhetoric around those that sounds like it's stemming from American citizens, and that it's coming from advertising, from social groups.
But they're based on real events, genuine events.
They're based on actual events. Obviously, every single one of these that I just talked about are certainly legitimate. But the vernacular around those, the rabble rousing, I don't know what else to call it, the amplification, the disruption of those with their rhetoric then becomes how they function. So it has credibility in reality and then gets blown up by these posts.
Distorted, really distorted.
Well, let me give you some examples of that
all right.
as I go. Members of the conspiracy were directed to create political intensity through supporting radical groups, users dissatisfied with the social economic situation, and oppositional social movements. The conspiracy also sought, in the words of one member of the conspiracy, to, quote, effectively aggravate the conflict between minorities and the rest of the population. So we've been scratching our heads here for the last long while as to why this kind of rhetoric just doesn't go away. Why aren't we better people than this? Why can't we get beyond certain racial biases or racial default attitudes that are out there? And one answer to that is, well, because this is infused into our social media by a foreign menace in that respect. So there's 11 examples cited within the affidavit. I'm not going to go through all 11 of those, especially since we only have 8 minutes left here. Oh my gosh. Let me get into some examples. Let's see how far I can.
Well, and you know, I'm not sure that we can't pick it up again.
Well, we'll have to pick. Well, yeah, this will be a part 3 then of this whole theme as we get into next week's show.
Because it's so illustrative of what's happening.
Conspiracy also develops strategies and guidance to target audiences with conservative and liberal viewpoints as well as particular social groups. For example, a member of the conspiracy advised in or around October 2017 that if you write posts in a liberal group, you can't use Breitbart titles. And on the contrary, if you write posts in a conservative group, you can't use Washington Post or BuzzFeed titles. So what a lot of these articles are doing is they're taking content from these different publications or online publications, putting it up there, but they're saying, but you can't use the same titles because that will go through and say, oh, wait a minute, I've seen this someplace else. Maybe this isn't all it's cracked up to be. So they're going to steps to take care of that. Here's members of the conspiracy sought to target the timing of their posts so to attract the widest possible viewership. This is from a communique within the conspiracy. Quote, posting can be problematic due to time difference, but if you make your reposts in the morning, St. Petersburg time, it works well with liberals, LGBTQ groups are often active at night. Also, the conservatives can view your reposts when they wake up in the morning if you post it before you leave in the evening at St. Petersburg time. So the budget for this, which Elena was over, and she's over this with at least a half a dozen different kinds of front companies to go through and keep this thing organized, is about $1.5 million a month. All told, about $35 million so far just on this campaign and what's going on. So there's big money involved in that. Let me get into the examples here in the last 5 minutes that I've got. Citing an online news article entitled, McCain Says Thinking a Wall Will Stop Illegal Immigration is Crazy. Now, the affidavit doesn't give the source for that, but I think this was a USA Today story.
Okay.
From on or about August 5th, 2017, a member of the conspiracy directed that the article be messaged in the following way. So they're actually suggesting the kind of rhetoric that can be written into either a response article or an inclusive article in getting this information out there. Brand McCain as an old geezer who has lost it and who long ago belonged in a home for the elderly. emphasize that John McCain's pathological hatred towards Donald Trump and towards all his initiatives crosses all reasonable borders and limits, state that dishonorable scoundrels such as McCain immediately aim to destroy all the conservative voters' hopes as soon as Trump tries to fulfill his election promises and tries to protect the American interests. Now, this is translated from Russian, okay, to go into the affidavit. A second one, citing an online news article titled, "Paul Ryan Opposes Trump's Immigration Cuts, Wants Struggling American Workers to Stay Poor," from on or about August 5th, 2017. Excuse me, sorry about that, audio person. A member of the conspiracy directed that the article be messaged this way: brand Paul Ryan a complete and absolute nobody incapable of any decisiveness. Emphasize that while serving as speaker, this two-faced loudmouth has not accomplished anything good for America or for the American citizens. State that the only way to get rid of Ryan from Congress, provided he wins in 2018 primaries, is to vote in favor of Brandy Rice, an American veteran and an iron worker and a Democrat. Again, translated from Russian text. I want to talk a little bit about this instead of going through and citing the rest of them, which I'll do in next week's show as well, because I think it's imperative that you understand, that we all understand, the comprehensiveness of this campaign, the sophistication of it, how it weasels into every kind of attitude that might be prevailing out there, enough to inflame that to go through and say, oh, well, we're so different that I can't get along with you. I can't talk to you. I can't engage in civil discourse now because I really don't like you. And I don't know why I'm feeling that way. Well, this is why we're feeling that way, is because we have this kind of pink elephant suggestions going on that a lot of people are glomming onto without actually vetting what those sources are, where those sources are actually coming from.
And because of the volume, it makes it seem real and it makes it seem valid. It makes it seem more important and significant in our society than it actually is.
Riding on the heels of a free press in the United States, taking solid journalism that's out there and then turning that to their own designs to go through and discredit a politician, to go through and smear somebody's reputation, to go through and misrepresent policy that might be out there. It's very sophisticated.
Well, relating to this free press, there's a book that's out called Like War, The Weaponization of Social Media. Right. And I'm going to be seeing if I can get a hold of that and be looking at. Is that
Jameson's book?
This is a book by P.W. Singer.
Oh, okay.
And Emerson T. Brooking.
Okay.
As author. And it was just mentioned, I'll just read you maybe just a super one or two sentences. Two defense experts explore the collision of war, politics, and social media, where the most important battles are now only a click away.
Send me a link to that and I'll post that up on our Facebook page as well. And if you have something you'd like to chime in on this conversation, you could do so at our Facebook page at facebook.com/TalkingPointLive. And I'll try to get a reference to this PDF, this affidavit as well, so you can go through and read along with us here on the show.
Good.
What do you think?
Well, one thing I appreciate is that this is a primary source document that you're presenting. Right. So it's not second and third hand interpretations of the content. It's actually
this is the horse's mouth.
primary source, and that's really important as a model for our critical thinking and as citizens is to look at. And I will confess I have not read the Mueller indictment yet, every single bit of it. Right? And I feel like that is something that if I wish to consider myself a well-informed American, I should actually read that document, not just take other people's interpretation of it for granted.
Because it is squirrely in terms of those other interpretations that are going on.
So thank you for the primary source.
You bet. And speaking of primary sources, as you get ready to vote, or if you're voting by mail, do yourself a favor and go through each one of those candidates, look them up. Take a look at what their ratings might be, especially if they're judges, if they're county judges or state judges.
How are we going to know if the sources online are
Well, the sources online, one deals with the Utah Bar Association that goes through a pretty thorough vetting of each of the candidates.
And do we even have to be careful that the URL is an authentic one?
Yes, absolutely.
Because we can find the Utah Bar Association and then ... Russian fingerprints at the end of the URL. So,
well, at the risk of scaring you off, though, in doing so, just do yourself a favor and make sure that you can go through and see what those candidates actually represent and that they are consistent with your voting wishes there. Next week, I hope to have Taylor Gwynn actually joining us on the show through Skype, and he'll talk about a map that he's put together that I think is pretty fascinating as well.
Great, great.
So,
thanks,
we're
Eric.
out of time. Thank you, Jen, for enduring my reading. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.